Namaskar. Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Joining me today, as always, is Kalavai Venkat. Somehow we missed it on Friday. We are making up today. We'll be having another episode in English on Friday, time permitting. So today's episode, let's welcome Kalavai Venkat. Venkatji, Namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel. How are you?
Namaste, Shreya. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. So today we are going to talk about part 3 in our ongoing series about the truths about Christianity. And what we're going to talk about today is Jesus a myth? So take it away wherever you want to start, and we can start talking about it. Over to you.
All right. I think the very question may sound a little strange to a lot of the viewers because they're used to this calendar, right? We have the current year is 2025 AD or Common Era. Uh, and hence people assume that Jesus must have appeared 2025 years ago. And that's why we are having this calendar. And of course, if we just examine that question a little bit rationally, we will understand that such an event is not possible because even if everybody knew in that village, okay, that Jesus is a divine child, he's going to be born, nobody is going to come and say today is the day the calendar will begin because Jesus was born today. Okay, because for a calendar to be meaningful, it should be understood not only by a village but by the entire country, by probably multiple nations surrounding a particular area. Everybody should understand, so that a calendar is never created based on the birth of a person. It's always a post fact event. In the case of Christianity, there was uh, a Christian priest who went by the name Dionysius Exiguus. He lived around 525 AD. That's around 6th century. That's almost 525, 530 years after the birth of Jesus. And he creates a calendar, and then he does a lot of back calculation. Then he comes up with the finding that Jesus was born in what we can call year zero now. So that's how the calendar was born. But even when Exiguus calculated, he made a couple of calculation errors. So even according to mainstream Christianity, even according to the Pope, even according to uh, the Protestants, everybody, Jesus was born somewhere between 4 and 7 BCE. Okay, that is 4 to 7 years before the start of the Common Era. So there itself, Exiguus, he misses out one critical aspect, and then he misses a few years because he's doing a retroactive calculation and he's not reporting based on any of the realities. Then what happens is another historian comes by the name the Venerable Bede. He comes in the 8th century. Then he looks at the calendar. Then he realizes something. Look, this calendar starts in year zero. What existed before that? Then he comes up with BC. Then he projects all the events going backwards, that is in the other direction, in negative years. And that's how this calendar came up. This calendar is not proof of the existence of Jesus. Rather, it was created first in 525 AD, and again in the 8th century, this was updated. So in two updates, this calendar was made, and this is not proof of the existence of Jesus. Now, do you want to bring up the slides? Here you are seeing a couple of books. One is by Bart Ehrman, and the other one is by Giza Vermes. And then in this case, what you'll find something is very interesting. Okay, so according to the mainstream Christian accounts, Jesus lived for around 33 or 34 years. He was born sometime around sometime between 4 and 7 BC, and he died somewhere around 2930 AD. So that means he lived for around 34 years or so, roughly speaking. Yet, what you find is all the events that are recorded in the Bible and other texts all happen in the last 1.5 to 2 years of the life of Jesus. It all begins with the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist in the river Jordan. So that happens about 1.5 to 2 years before the death of Jesus. Then all the sermons of the Jesus, all the miracles he allegedly performs, all of those things happen in the last 1.5 to 2 years of the life of Jesus. Nothing is recorded before that. Now, pause for a moment and think. If you take any historical figure, let's say someone like Gandhi or someone like Swami Vivekananda, if you take the life of Swami Vivekananda, you will find his biographers, his hagiographers, they will be reporting a lot of events throughout his life. And of course, there will be a lot of concentration on his philosophical message, on his preachings and other things. But they will start telling about who his parents were, where was he born, where he went to school, what is his childhood look like, what was his youth like when he met Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and before that, did he spend some time with the Brahma Samajis? You will find all of these details. So, if you take any historical person, you will be able to construct a lot of events throughout his life, especially if that person had a lot of following. We can say that Swami Vivekananda had a large following. Gandhi had a large following. And sometimes, Christian apologists will come back and demand, we don't know anything about the life of Socrates or Aristotle or even Plato or any one of them, except the books they have written and a few events from their lives that have been reproduced by others. That's a legitimate question. There is a reason. Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato were philosophers. They taught a small number of students. It's something like they taught in what you call the gymnasium of Greece. That's the equivalent of the Ivy League universities of today, where you may go and enlist for a PhD program, and your teacher, your professor, may be teaching maybe 3 or 4 students, maybe 5 students. So while all of these figures, the Greek figures, are highly celebrated, they are celebrated for their writings, for their philosophies, not because they had a large following. That's why nobody wrote a biography of them during their lifetime or even after that. And what you find is a reproduction of their books, the reproduction of their writings. If you take Plato, for example, his Republic is a very famous book that gets quoted by other Greek writers and then it gets reproduced, but you don't find any biographical accounts of Plato uh, captured by others, mainly because he did not have a big following and he was a philosopher, he was writing for the elite. Whereas in the case of popular leaders, the Bible says Jesus was extremely popular. He had a large following. He performed miracles. He even the Roman Empire felt threatened by him. The governor of Judea felt threatened by him. That's why he was crucified. So such a person, if especially if his birth itself was miraculous, and throughout his life he was a miracle worker, you should find events being reported. That's not the case, and that's very strange because if a historical person existed, the entire world will not go quiet about him for 32 years and only report the last 2 years. Now, some Christians may raise an objection. They may ask, what about the infancy narratives in the Bible? What about some other episodes like the Sermon on the Mount? Okay, that's in the Bible. These are reported, and are these not proofs of the existence of Jesus? Then the third incident somebody may quote is when he was 12, Jesus goes to the synagogue in Jerusalem, to the temple in Jerusalem, and he debates with everyone. And even his mother is completely surprised, and she's taken by surprise that her son, a 12-year-old son, is able to debate the rabbis. Let's address all the three. Let's go to the next slide, starting with the infancy gospels. Sorry, starting with the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, uh, in its entirety, probably it is the most popular or most famous saying in the Bible, or the most famous teaching attributed to Jesus. Yet, in its entirety, it's only found in one gospel, the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 5, 6, and 7. In small quotations, in bits and pieces, one line here, one line there, it's reported in other gospels, but the entire sermon is reproduced only by Matthew, and that's strange because if Jesus delivered a sermon, and if this sermon is so lengthy that it spans 3 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew, and if it is an important sermon that was addressed to so many people, then it's strange that all the other Gospel writers will totally ignore it and only Matthew will record. That's why John Dominic Crossan, one of the most celebrated biblical scholars, and he was himself a Catholic priest earlier. Then he stopped being a Catholic priest, he quit, but he's still a Christian. And he comes up with a very important observation that the Sermon on the Mount was basically a lot of anonymous sayings attributed to Jesus that were collected together and stitched together as a narrative, as a story by by the writer of the Gospel of Matthew. We do not know his real name. We just call him Matthew, but then that's where it stops. Then let's now switch to the infancy Gospels. Uh, sorry, one more thing. So, Yerman, talking about the Sermon on the Mount, Yerman bought Yerman, whom we saw in the previous podcast. Uh, no, we can stay there. We can stay there. Go back to, yeah. So, Bart Ehrman makes a very important observation. If you look at the right top of the slide, he also points out that the earliest gospel, the Gospel of Mark, does not carry the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. So, this is completely absent in the earliest gospel. And just for the benefit of the viewers, the gospels are dated somewhere from around 75, 80 AD, which is about 50 years after the death of Jesus, to about close to 100 AD. That's the four Gospels. And Mark is the earliest Gospel to be written. And according to mainstream dating, the only other book that was written before that were the epistles of Paul. Okay, they were written somewhere between 49 and 61 or 62 AD. So among the Gospels, Mark is the earliest, and it does not contain any Sermon on the Mount. And this is very strange that the earliest of the Gospels wouldn't contain the sermon, but one of the later gospels produces altogether a fully formed sermon, that too running over 3 chapters. Then, coming to the alleged debate that Jesus had when he was 12 years old. The story goes like this: the family of Jesus leaves Jerusalem, and then they are traveling for 3 days. And after 3 days, his parents realize, his mother and others, they realize that Jesus is not in the entourage. Now, that's a strange story for many reasons. Number one, uh, nobody travels for 3 days without noticing that that 12-year-old child is missing. And then second, the Jewish temple in Jerusalem is not a place where a 12-year boy can show up and debate the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the rest of his Sanhedrin and others. So it's a place where people will go and they pray, and then they will make their offerings, and they will do the equivalent of Balidan that we do in the temple. Those things they will do, but then if at all there were sermons, they'll be given by the rabbis, by the Sadducees, by the Pharisees and others, and there won't be any debate, and definitely not a 12-year boy showing up and having that debate. So this again is an incident which is uh, forcefully fitted into the biblical narrative. And there is another reason why this is impossible, because even according to the biblical narrative, Mary conceives Jesus miraculously. She's a virgin and she conceives Jesus, and then a voice from the heaven, the angel comes and tells her that she would conceive the Son of God. So that means even before Jesus was born, Mary would have been aware that she is going to give birth to a miraculous child, a divine child, the future Messiah. So when such a miraculous child grows up to the age of 12 and goes and debates in the synagogue, if at all that incident ever happened, why would Mary be surprised? She would not be surprised at all, because she will know this is Son of God, this is God Himself. So what's the big deal of him debating an ordinary rabbi in the synagogue? So, whereas in the Bible, she is completely taken by surprise, and she is wondering, how come you are debating all these people? Okay, so all of these are giveaway that the Bible was written in patches by multiple sources and pulled together, and that's how the episode of Jesus debating at the age of 12 happens. And what about the infancy gospels? So, the infancy narrative uh, pertains to the virginal conception of Jesus by Mary, his miraculous birth. Then the three magi visit from either Persia or from India. It's very hard to tell. The Bible just says they come from the east. They visit, and then uh, uh, when all of these events are happening, uh, this is reported. All of these are together called the infancy gospels or the infancy narratives, and these are reported only in two of the gospels: Matthew chapters 1 and 2, and Luke chapters 1 and 2. It's not there in the Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest, and the Gospel of John, which is the last of the four. So once again, we are seeing that the earliest of the Gospel knows nothing about the miraculous birth or the infancy narratives of Jesus, and it is only found in Matthew and Luke. And even there, Bob Tierman points out that the Gospel of Luke, chapters 1 and 2 are forgeries. They were written much later, and that's not, because that's why those chapters are missing in the earliest manuscripts, and then they were inserted into the Gospel of Luke. So the only source where the infancy narratives appear is the Gospel of Matthew. Now, once again, think of it. This is a miraculous birth, and a divine child has been conceived, and a virgin gives birth to the child. Yet, this miracle is reported only by one gospel, and the earliest gospel ignores it, and Paul, the earliest writer of epistles, ignores the incident. So, what does it tell you? This tells you this is a miraculous event, it's a magical event which was created centuries later and retroactively projected onto the past. And whereas when you look at the gospel itself, you see nothing about the life of Jesus except the last 1.5 to 2 years, which are all theological in nature, and none of those are real events. But then uh, the initial 31, 32 years of his life, you find nothing. So that's another very good giveaway that Jesus was most probably a mythical figure and not a historical character. And when we say myth, a myth is not a derogatory term. Okay. So for example, if you take, the story of Vikramaditya and Betal, right, which we read in Hindi all the time. So these stories are written to convey a message. So every time Vikramaditya will go and he will take the corpse down from the tree, and then the Betal will start addressing him, ask him questions, he will give an answer, right? And then the same episode continues the next day with another story, then the third episode, the fourth, the fifth. Okay, it continues. So nobody believes that Betal existed or the corpse was hanging from there and all of those things. But then there is a riddle, and Vikramaditya solves it. And then a lot of the gospels are written like that to convey a theological message and not to relate or narrate a historical event. We can go back to the next slide, sir. So in this one comes the question. So where did the entire idea that a virgin will give birth to a divine child arise from? According to the New Testament, uh, this is prophecy in Isaiah 7:14, which says that a virgin will give birth to a child named Emmanuel. And of course, Jesus' name was not Emmanuel. That's a different story. We'll leave it aside. But the Aramaic word uh, for virgin, sorry, the Aramaic word which is used in Isaiah 7:14 is alama. Okay, alama means a young woman of marriageable age. It does not mean virgin. So what happens is around the second century BC, uh, the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible, of which Isaiah 7:14 is part, gets translated from Hebrew to Greek. Okay, so what is the difference between Hebrew and Aramaic? Aramaic is the colloquial language; it's a spoken language, similar to the Prakrits that were spoken across India. And Hebrew, on the other hand, is the literary language, it's the classical language, similar to Sanskrit. Okay, so Sanskrit was the literary language, is the literary language, and Prakrits were the spoken variants, colloquial variants. So in Hebrew, the Old Testament is written, and then it gets now translated into Greek as Septuagint. And when it is translated, this word alama, which originally meant young woman in Aramaic and Hebrew, now gets mistranslated as Parthenos, meaning a virgin. So the entire story of a virgin conceiving Jesus and giving birth to a divine child was the result of a mistranslation from Hebrew to Greek. Next slide, sir. This is another excellent book which everybody should be reading. But the brief message is this, right? That the earliest of the writers who starts reporting about the life, about the teachings of Jesus or about Jesus is Paul. Yet Paul does not cite any incident at all, any parable, any teaching of Jesus at all from his life, even though he's the first to live. So, as I mentioned, Jesus should have died around 30 CE, if at all a historical Jesus existed. And Paul was writing his epistles from around 49 to 61 or 62 AD. So he's the nearest. If at all he existed, if at all Jesus existed, Paul was the nearest to Jesus. Yet he does not quote anything from the life of Jesus except two or three very passing references where one he says, do not divorce. That could be a teaching coming from Jesus because Jesus actually vilifies divorced women. He condemns them. He equates them with prostitutes. He condemns them, and all of those terrible things are there in the teachings of Jesus. So Paul also discourages divorce, and once again, that's a possibility that he was quoting a word of Jesus, but we cannot be 100% sure of that. And then he kind of makes a passing reference to a statement in the Last Supper, and then he says uh, that the congregation should pay the Christian preachers. So that's it. These are two or three passing references, and we can only second guess these could have been spoken by Jesus and hence are quoted by Paul. But apart from that, Paul doesn't quote anything at all from the teachings of Jesus, from the parables of Jesus, from the sermons of Jesus, which is very strange because he was the nearest in time, and his audience would have been familiar with Jesus if at all he lived, because some of them would still be alive 16, 17 years after he died. And hence, uh, Paul would be able to relate to them a lot easily by quoting the actual words of Jesus, but he does not. Next slide, sir. So, why at all where all these myths return? So, once again, we should turn to the researchers of Bob Tierman and his book Lost Christianity, which you see on the screen. It's a fantastic book which everyone should read. But basically, here is the thesis of Bob Tierman, which he demonstrates with ample evidences. In the first 200 to 300 years of Christianity, or probably even until the 4th century, there were many Christianities. There was not a single Christianity. There were numerous of them. There were, for example, the Ebionites who embraced a life of poverty, and then there were Marcionites. So there was a very influential church father or a religious leader by the name Marcion, and then he was a very rich man. He also had a lot of ships, and he was trading, and he also gave a lot of money to the church in Rome, and he had a huge following. He goes to Rome around 139 AD and stays there for 5 or 6 years. What does he do there? He goes there with his canon of New Testament, but it has only 11 books. We saw in the previous episodes that the current New Testament has 27 books, but whereas Marcion, whose uh, New Testament is the earliest canon known to us, uh, has only 11 books in his canon, not 27. So this again tells you that the religion was evolving in the first 2 centuries, and this is around 140 CE. So Marcion had a very different view of Christianity, had a very different view of Jesus. According to him, Jesus was not even human. Jesus was divine, and he arrived fully formed as an adult only around the age of 32, 31, or whatever it was. And he just came here to preach. So he doesn't care about all the miraculous birth of Jesus and other things. So even though he kind of very strangely accepts that he was born to a virgin, that phrase could be also an interpolation by later church leaders. But according to him, there were two gods. The God of the Old Testament was an evil God. He was a control freak. He punishes people. And then the God of Christianity, that's Jesus and the Father in heaven, they come to redeem the world through love. So basic purpose of Marcion is to tell the world to reject Judaism, to reject the Old Testament, to reject the Jewish laws, and to instead start following a new religion. And in that, he creates two gods, okay, which is very strange. And in the God of the Old Testament is called Demiurge, and which is an undesirable God to be replaced with the God of the New Testament. So the reason a lot of these myths were created was there were many Christianities in the first 200, 300 years. And as Bart Ehrman points out, the Christianity of Marcion flourished even until the 4th century, even though he was excommunicated by the church as early as 145 AD. He had a large following, and his cult had spread all over the Roman Empire, and hence it flourished even until the 4th century, until before it was completely suppressed and made illegal. So there were many Christianities, and each one of them to tell a story of who their Jesus was, who their Messiah was. They were creating a myth and they were relaying it. And that's how all these texts were formed. And the Gospels, as we know today, were only compiled in the 4th century. And what we have is a collection of stories, a way to synthesize all of the conflicting ideologies. Many of those could not be synthesized, and hence they were kicked out as apocryphal texts, and some of them militated against the Catholic idea, because Catholic Church was the first to be formed around the 4th century. So many of these myths were kicked out, and that's why they became lost Christianities. But the rest, which the church could reconcile to some extent, they stitched them all together. And as a result, what you have is an anthology called the New Testament, and then a mythical Jesus. This will take only 30 seconds. So Daniel Boyarin, I think he's still alive. I could be wrong. A great professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and an expert on uh, the Jewish Bible, and then the uh, entire apocalyptic movement that existed from around maybe 150 BC to maybe around 150 200 AD. Okay, he's one of the world-renowned experts, and then he has written a couple of books. You can see the title out there. And the basic thesis of Daniel Boyarin is this: around 150 BC, that's 150 years before the birth of Jesus, uh, the book of Daniel and a lot of commentaries on the book of Daniel were written. And that was the time when Israel was occupied by Rome. It was under colonial rule, and the Jews were oppressed, and then they were anticipating the arrival of a Messiah. They hoped that a Jewish Messiah will return, and then he will liberate the Jews from the clutches of Roman Empire, and he will be the new king. This Messiah will be the new king, and then he will usher in a golden rule of the Jews. So this belief was extremely widespread. And as part of this belief, as part of commentary on the book of Daniel, the Jews also believed that this Messiah will be persecuted, this Messiah will be killed or crucified, and then he will resurrect 3 days later. This was a common belief which precedes Christianity by at least 150 years, or precedes the birth of Jesus by at least 150 years. And, and hence, when the Bible writers started writing the story of Jesus, they would have run into objection. Uh, because the earliest Christians, as we saw, were Jewish Christians. They were not the pagans. They were the Jews who lived in and around Israel. They would have asked the question, they would have cited the book of Daniel, all the commentaries, and they would have said, wait a minute, the Messiah would have suffered, he would have been crucified, and then he would have uh, been resurrected 3 days later. Did that happen to your Messiah? And the Christians said, yes, it happened. So what was prophesied and what was predicted for centuries continuously before the birth of Jesus was repackaged as the story of the crucifixion of Jesus. Back to you, sir.
Couple of things. A couple of my regular viewers are having a lot of grief. See, Venkat is not forming his own opinions. He's just telling us the research of many books. And I mean, why are you getting so bent out of shape? This is the research from scholars who have spent probably their lifetime studying whether Jesus was there or not. After all, Irving Wallace wrote the book called The Word, which is all about this. That the guy starts writing about a person who claims that he has proof that showed that Jesus Christ existed on earth. I think 70s or 80s, Irving Wallace has The Word. He has written a lot of things that start with with the word the man, the thing, the this, the that, and so on and so forth. So there has been a doubt whether Jesus ever existed on earth. And whatever Christianity now says, my understanding is it's that Constantine and his mother-in-law, there's a dream, she has a dream, and in that dream she says that Jesus takes birth in a specific place in Jerusalem. That's how the whole thing is established, that's where it was.
That dream pertains to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Okay, so what it does is, here is the place Jesus was born and the church gets built. Okay, yes, but what you're saying is correct, because what we call Christianity, in what you're seeing until this part, right, part 3, is that there were many Christianities. Okay, many books were written. Like Marcion had only 11 books as part of his canon, whereas a few decades later, by the time of uh, the later church fathers, Origen and all of these fathers, by the time the number had grown, and by the time of Constantine in the 4th century, finally, when they get rid of other books which are inconvenient truths, they end up with 27 books. Okay, so yes, and of course, here's a simple deal, right? So why did Christianity start to decline in the West? Okay, there are two, three reasons, right? One is the Renaissance and Enlightenment, and a lot of ideas from the East, right? Buddhism, ideas from Hinduism, and other things travel to the West, and that's why you have great writers from Voltaire to Nietzsche to Emerson and many others. They are fully immersed in the Hindu ideas. Many of these ideas travel to the West, and especially this process was accelerated towards the 19th century and the early 20th century. And another thing happened in parallel. Okay, there was a new discipline related to philology. It's called textual criticism. Okay, that became the norm for critically examining the biblical text. So when it happened, initially the Vatican was super excited. They thought all along we do not have any proof for the existence of Jesus. Now, with all this textual criticism, we can demonstrate that, and we can actually increase the faith of the followers. But what happened was, as intelligent people started critically examining the Bible, critically examining all the other sources we have covered so far, the non-Christian sources, the pagan sources, the Jewish sources, etc., they started losing their faith. Even the trained priests of the orders of the Jesuits and others, they started losing their faith, and then the church panicked. Okay, so today, uh, because these truths are increasingly known to the people of the West, the educated people of West, in the Western Europe, Christianity is practically dead. Even in America, only 20-25% of the people are going to the church. Okay, and in the next generation, that number will go down even further. And a lot of people are getting angry because they have been brainwashed. Okay, they have been converted to Christianity. They have been brainwashed, and they have never heard these truths. But here is my question: if your faith cannot withstand the truth, what good is it? And if you have to only fake it to retain your faith, then what good is it? What do you say? Next question.
Um, all right. So that's all I had. Let's take a quick look at any questions that we have. Let me see. I mean, there's a lot of bile being emitted, but I don't see any questions here. Let me just. Oh,
All right.
here's
If not,
one.
if not, there was
Well, I'll
another
ask you
question.
this question. You keep
Yeah,
answering, and I'll look for another one. The foundations of the Christianity is fake. Original sin is a fake narrative, as human being is not originated from two people.
that's correct. That's very true. Okay. So first of all, if you look at evolutionary biology, it's we do not descend from two fully formed people, right? So we start evolving from prokaryotes to eukaryotes to protein synthesis started happening, and it's a 4 billion. The Earth has been around for 4 billion years. It's a 4 billion year long process through which we slowly evolved. And in fact, any biologist will tell you that even like a few thousand years ago, when the Neanderthals existed and the Cro-Magnon existed, what we call the Homo sapiens or the modern human beings, and then the Neanderthals, they did mate with each other. Okay, so in other words, we are products of evolution. We never descended from a fully formed couple known as Adam and Eve. Okay, so that itself is an absolutely nonsensical view which the Bible peddles, and that again tells you how ignorant those people are. And then contrast this with the Rig Veda, right? So you look at the Rig Veda, you have this Nasadiya Suktam. Okay, so in the Nasadiya Suktam, the question comes up, okay, where did this world come from? They go through all the questions, and then they speculate, and then they answer, who knows? Okay, even if the gods, if they exist and if they had created the world, even they may not know the answer. So Hinduism was extremely comfortable with exploring the natural phenomena. That's what an intelligent mind does. It does not fill gaps in knowledge with certitude, whereas Christianity peddles these kind of absurd stories. And talking of original sin, again, what is really original sin? If you look at the Bible, there is a talking serpent. Okay, set aside all the superstitions. Of course, there's a talking serpent, and then uh, it it convinces Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge, to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And once they've eaten it, they acquire discriminating knowledge. It's a good thing, right? That's what we want every child to do. We tell the child, acquire knowledge and learn to be discriminating. And the Bible, Christianity considers this the original sin. Because the moment we have acquired knowledge and the moment we learn to discriminate, we become sinners. Because then we will know what a fraudulent religion Christianity is, how terrible its teachings are. So now it says, since now you have committed a sin, now you have to accept Jesus as your savior. Only then you'll be saved from your sin. So it's an absurd idea. So and of course, everything you look at in Christianity tends to be absurd.
RAP2246 wants to know, there are questions about the existence of Jesus. There might have been a character similar to that of Jesus. Emperor
Yeah.
Constantine created Christianity.
In fact, we are going to discuss this particular thing in a coming episode. I think you're going to do that on Friday. Okay. So, what if a historical Jesus existed, right? So we can be certain that a Jesus as described in the Bible did not exist. Okay. Is it possible that this Jesus is actually a composite? Okay. He's a mixture of different characters because we know that the apocalyptic sentiment uh, was very prevalent in the first century Judea, first century Israel. Apocalypse means the world was going to come to an end very soon, and a Jewish Messiah will come and save them. So this fervor and this belief was very prevalent in first century Judea, and there were many people even had the name Yeshua. Okay, Yeshua is the Hebrew Aramaic name for Jesus. They had even the same name, and then many of them claimed to be the Messiah, and many of them were proven to be false. Actually, all of them were proven to be false, and all of those exist. So, is it possible that these different floating stories were taken together and a composite Jesus was created, somewhat like Mahagathbandhan or Indie Alliance, right? And if you look at all this Indie Alliance and all these things, they are disparate characters. Okay, so they have nothing in common. You take Samajwadi Party, you take Congress, you take DMK, uh, TMC, and all that. They have nothing in common except they all want to loot. Okay, and then hence they are all clamoring for the minority votes, and hence they come together and then they form an alliance. So for the first 4 centuries, uh, there were different Christianities, and Constantine did not create it. Okay, that's a misconception a lot of people have. Constantine did not create modern Christianity. What happens? He rules the Roman Empire from the east, from Constantinople or today's Istanbul, okay, in Turkey. So that place had already become kind of Christianized by the time he comes. Okay, many of his soldiers were Christians already, and that's why when you read the biography of Julian, the apostate, a Roman emperor who comes a century later and tries to revive pagan religions and get rid of Christianity, he gets murdered, okay, by a Christian soldier. So Christianity was already uh, quite strong in the fourth century by the time Constantine comes to rule. And we saw even in the second century, the church was powerful enough to excommunicate Marcion around 144, 145 AD. So you have a powerful church. Okay, so you had many Christianities. What Constantine did was to bring all of them together. Okay, the different warring factions. They literally had a fist fight. That's what they were doing. And then uh, he tried to do some kind of samanvaya, meaning reconciliation. And then whoever did not agree, they were declared as heretical and they were kicked out. And then the rest of it was put together. Okay, but even then, uh, until his death, okay, there is no guarantee that Constantine himself had become a Christian. For one, he was baptized in what is known as the Arian heresy. Okay, so there was one other strand of Christianity known as Arianism, 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 and then Constantine was baptized by a priest from that sect. And then when he dies, even very close to his death, okay, because he is supposed to have made Christianity legitimate around 306 or 307 after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. But even for many decades after that, he continues to print coins. And in those coins, he has the image of the sun god, okay, not that of the cross. So, once again, these are all some indications that even Constantine did not become fully Christian, and Christianity continued to evolve. But definitely by the end of that century, the fourth century, beginning of fifth, uh, Christianity had become very powerful and it had outlawed all the other religions. And we can say it's a combination of all of these events that created Christianity, and it was not one person.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to a close of today's program. We'll be back again tomorrow morning, episode 4, right? 4 of
Episode 4 in Tamil.
Unspoken Christianity Hidden Truths, episode 4 in Tamil at 7 p.m. IST. And episode 4 of English will come on Friday at 8 p.m. IST, subject to some things. Hopefully, Venkatji has a time. Thank you so much, Venkatji. Namaskar.
Namaste. Thank you.